Good morning, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to be here in Bogotá, in your lovely city. This is my second visit. And the difference between my first visit and the second visit is that on the first visit I didn't have a bad headache like I have today. But one thing that has not changed is that the women of Bogotá are the most beautiful. And they're today as they were last time. I have been asked to speak about nutrient requirements of preterm infants. And I accepted to do that reluctantly because every time I speak about nutrient requirements to neonatologists, they say, who needs to know about nutrient requirements? It's so uninteresting. I'll try to convince you that it is important for you to know certain things about nutrient requirements. You don't need to know a lot. But unless you know certain things about nutrient requirements, there's no way that you can ever give premature babies enough nutrients. If you don't know it, how can you provide them? So, this is a reminder that where I live is Iowa, which is very close to Chicago. And right now it is very, very cold there. It's only cold in Minneapolis, which is a little bit north, which is where Dr. Georgiev comes from. But it's very cold and we have much snow, and I'm very happy to be here for a few days. I've lived in this town for 40 years, and the next slide shows you the man who was the reason why I went from Austria to Iowa. This is Professor Foreman, who was and still is the most important researcher in infant nutrition. And most of what I know, he taught me. He was my mentor and friend until he died 2 months ago after a battle with cancer. So the next slide. Why does a neonatologist need to know what the nutrient requirements are of preterm infants? I already alluded to that. Because when premature babies do not receive intakes of energy and protein that meet the requirements, premature infants fail to grow and lose IQ points and are at increased risk of neurologic impairment. That is why you need to know what certain nutrient requirements are. Next slide. What does the neonatologist need to know? And it's not very much, but he or she needs to know what the caloric requirements are. He or she needs to know what the protein requirements are. He or she does not need to know what the selenium requirement is. And I put selenium there. It stands for all other nutrients. All other nutrients. You don't need to know them. But you should know that, for instance, some new research indicates that perhaps what we used to think about LC-PUFA, that their nutrient requirements are met when the baby receives mother's milk, may not be true. There is now new research suggesting or predicting that these babies need more LC-PUFAs. So that's a special case. But for all the other nutrients, you can assume, next slide please, that when you meet the caloric requirements, that the needs for all other nutrients are met except for protein and possibly, as I alluded to, LC-PUFAs, the omega-3 fatty acids. But for most nutrients, with the exception of protein, you can assume that when the baby receives adequate calories, that all other nutrients are provided in adequate amounts. So is this the end of the talk? Well, unfortunately not. You need to know a little bit more. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you about postnatal growth failure and why it is so important that we have it, what it means, what the consequences are, and what we could do to prevent it. And by preventing growth failure, as I will show you, we prevent poor neurocognitive outcome. So, next slide. So we have postnatal growth failure, and we all have it. Everybody has it, and if you think you don't have it in your nursery, it means that you haven't looked. But if you look what the weight of your baby is, of the babies is at discharge, those who have looked have all found that a high percentage of babies are SGA at the time of discharge. That means they have lost weight relative to where they would have been in utero had they not been born. So postnatal growth failure occurs everywhere, and it is more severe for the small babies than for the larger babies. Next slide. We published this from our unit back in 1998. This is the curve for 1995. It's the mean, the dotted line, the dots. That's the mean weight of babies born after 26 to 29 weeks gestation. And you see the weight falls off. The weight falls off. By 2 weeks back in 1995, we had recovered birth weight. And then the baby grows on average, but continues to fall off from where the baby would have been in utero. This is the 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile for growth, for weight in utero. So this is growth failure. Next slide. A year after us, Ehrenkrantz published similar data from the neonatal network. And I just would like to point to this graph here, this curve. This is babies with birth weights 24 to 25 weeks. And you see the same thing, a fall off, a recovery by 2 or 3 weeks, but then a continued fall off, continued growth failure. And by the time of discharge, a high percentage of babies are below the 10th percentile in weight. Next slide. We made a similar plot, this time for birth weight less than 1,000 grams. And here's our 1995 curve, and here's our 2005 curve. And you see, we have made some significant improvements, especially in the first 2 weeks. Our babies now regain birth weight at 7 days, 7.1 days to be precise, and not 14 days. And they start gaining weight earlier, but they continue to fall off. They continue to have growth failure. And this is really my main concern, and this is really why I think we all need to know more about nutrient requirements, and we need to do more to get the crucial nutrient, which is protein. For all intents and purposes, it is mostly protein. Calories play a minor role in this. We need to get more protein in the babies. If we don't, they will continue to fail to grow. Now, why is growth failure so important? Well, next slide. Okay, this is my slide. The cause of it, the cause of growth failure is inadequate nutrition. I've listed here steroids. Yes, we used to give steroids. We give steroids very little now. There may be inflammation caused, for instance, by mechanical ventilation. We know that causes inflammation. And these may be contributing to growth failure. But by far the most important reason for growth failure is inadequate nutrition. In other words, it is done by us. We give the babies inadequate nutrition. It's not something that's inevitable. We do it. Next slide. And so why is growth failure important? Because the inadequate nutrition that causes growth failure also impairs neurocognitive development. Do we know that? Yes, we know it. We have known it for many years. We tried to ignore it or tried to downplay it, but the evidence has been there for a number of years. For one thing, from the famous Lucas study in Cambridge, we have known that those babies who are the smallest at the hospital discharge are the ones with the most impaired neurocognitive outcome at 18 months and even at 6, 7, and 8 years. Now we have stronger data, and that's the next slide, from the Neonatal Research Network in the US. This is with a large number of babies, and I took out the slide with the details because I can explain it to you easier this way. This is a large number of babies with birth weights less than 1,250 grams. They were all followed up at 18 to 20 months and had a neurologic assessment, had MD, Bailey scales done. And in the analysis here, they divided the babies up into 4 quartiles by weight gain, and the weight gain was calculated from the time of regained birth weight, which was around 2 weeks, to the time of hospital discharge or transfer to another unit. So, in other words, the weight gain that they looked at here was after the first 2 weeks of life. It excludes the first 2 weeks of life where things have been changing. And these were babies that were born in 1994 to 96, I believe. That was before we started giving parenteral nutrition regularly soon after birth. But from the regained birth weight, from 2 weeks to discharge, they divided all the babies into 4 quartiles of weight gain. And you see the weight gain in grams per kilogram was 12 grams in the lowest quartile, the average weight gain, 15.6 in the second quartile, 17.8 in the third quartile, and 21.2 in the fourth quartile. For reference, the fetus in utero gains at approximately 18 grams per kilogram. So the third quartile were babies who gained like the fetus in utero. The babies in the first quartile gained much less. And this group included all the babies who had NEC, had other complications, sepsis, which tells us that these complications impact on growth. And it's not clear whether, at least not to me, whether it's the disease itself that impacts growth or whether it is what we do in response to the disease. For instance, we many times withhold feedings when a baby develops sepsis. And that may be the reason why. But nevertheless, this group had a much lower weight gain than this, and they're all significantly different. And this fourth group, the fourth quartile, these babies had weight gain greater than the fetus. So they showed some degree of catch-up growth. They made up for some of the weight they lost in the first 2 weeks of life. Now, on the same, so this is the weight gain in the hospital of these babies. When they looked at the percent with cerebral palsy, there was a indirect relationship to the rate of weight gain. In other words, the babies with the fastest weight gain had the lowest percent cerebral palsy. And that's shown on the next slide graphically. The babies with a better weight gain had less cerebral palsy. The group here, quartile 4 with catch-up growth had the lowest rate. This group here had a rate that was similar, but the group with the lowest weight gain had the highest rate. Can we go back to the previous slide? Back? No, back. Yeah. The same relationship holds for the mental development index. This is the percent of babies who had less than 70. And you see there's also a decrease with increasing weight gain. The same is true for the PDI, decrease with increasing weight gain. And total neurodevelopmental impairment also decreases with increasing weight gain. So this very strongly and very clearly tells us that the rate of weight gain predicts neurologic outcome. And it also implies that if we improve weight gain, we improve neurocognitive outcome. Next slide. Next. Then we have now additional data, which is really quite exciting. This time now we have actual nutrient intakes, and this is also from the Neonatal Research Network, but it's still unpublished. They found, again, taking the follow-up findings at the MDIs, the PDIs at 18 months, and then relating it to nutrient intakes in the first week of life. They found that for each gram of protein per kilogram per day,